You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. The McClure Arctic Expedition made history as the first to find and navigate the Northwest Passage, achieving this feat through a combination of ship travel and overland sled hauls. The team was on a quest to locate the missing Franklin expedition. Robert McClure and his crew endured a grueling 3-year entrapment within Arctic ice aboard the HMS Investigator. Ultimately, they had to abandon their vessel and traverse the ice on foot. They were eventually rescued by the crew of the HMS Resolute, which itself would later succumb to the ice. Upon McClure's return to England in 1854, he was honored with knighthood and received accolades for his part in successfully navigating the passage. Their expedition is credited with finding the first path, known as the Northwest Passage, specifically identifying the Prince of Wales Strait. However, their actual journey took them on an unplanned route due to various difficulties encountered along the way. They transferred over Banks Island, navigating the Banks Strait and Melville Sound, and then proceeded through the Barrow Strait to reach the Atlantic Ocean via the Parry Channel. Modern shipping through the Northwest Passage is extremely sporadic and is not considered a dependable commercial route, largely due to unpredictable ice conditions. The SS Manhattan, a commercial vessel, was the first to use McClure's original route through the Prince of Wales Strait for a successful transit of the Northwest Passage. Lady Jane Franklin made it a matter of national importance to find the Franklin expedition, which had been missing since 1847. In 1848, McClure had served as first lieutenant on Her Majesty's ship Enterprise with James Clark Ross, looking for the lost expedition, but their efforts were in vain. Due to ongoing failure to find any trace of the crew, the British Admiralty demanded a fresh search on January 15, 1850. The mission's primary aim was to gather information and to come to the aid of Sir John Franklin and his men, with secondary importance given to finishing the Northwest Passage from the other end. 2 vessels were designated for this endeavor. Her Majesty's ship Enterprise was sent back into service under Captain Richard Collinson, while Investigator, now under the Arctic command of Robert J. McClure, was tasked alongside it. Both ships, having already endured previous Arctic conditions, needed significant repairs and refitting, including the installation of a state-of-the-art heating system designed by Sylvester. Investigator, displaying a walrus on its figurehead, had been equipped with a 10-horsepower train engine and had received substantial reinforcements in 1848. For the voyage, preserved meats were procured from Gamble in Cork, Ireland. Despite some deterioration, it did not critically hinder the journey. The same could not be said regarding the earlier Franklin expedition. An increased supply of preserved limes was also taken to prevent scurvy. They charted a 7-month journey across the Atlantic and through the Straits of Magellan to Hawaii, continuing through the Aleutian Islands to the Bering Strait. This route aimed to approach the Arctic pack ice when it was at its thinnest. Supplies on board were planned to last for a trip of 3 years. On January 10, 1850, the fleet departed from Woolwich and swiftly finished loading supplies in Plymouth by January 20th. The expedition consisted of 66 individuals, one of whom was John Meerching, a German pastor who served as a translator for the Inuit. By March 5th, the ships had sailed south past the equator. Around the area of Rio de Janeiro, they spotted what the expedition's doctor, Alexander Armstrong, considered to be dubious slave ships. They reached their furthest point, south, the Strait of Magellan, on March 15th, with the ship Enterprise consistently outpacing the slower Investigator. After navigating the strait, the 2 vessels lost sight of each other, though McClure, the captain of the Investigator, later indicated that he believed their paths diverged on February 1, 1850, as suggested in a message sent in a bottle. The journey north was marked by several tempests that damaged 1,000 pounds, approximately 450 kilograms, of the ship's biscuit supply due to water incursion. a loss later mitigated by new provisions from the Sandwich Islands. The investigator crossed back over the equator on June 15th under blue skies and amidst tropical birds, after covering close to 15,000 miles. Morale was high, with McClure confidently writing in his journal about his trust in the crew's ability to tackle potential challenges. On July 1st, the investigator docked in Honolulu, narrowly missing the Enterprise by a single day. Carried by favorable breezes, McClure's ship departed 5 days later toward the Arctic Circle, effortlessly passing the Enterprise and the HMS Herald. By July 28th, they had entered the Arctic Circle, and the team concentrated on preparing their Arctic equipment, gearing up for the solitary Arctic exploration that lay ahead. Opting not to wait for the ship Enterprise, the investigator ventured alone into the icy waters near Cape Lisburne, Alaska. On July 20th, Captain McClure informed the Admiralty of his plans to proceed independently since Enterprise was no longer part of the expedition, believing this was the best alternative to fulfill their mission objectives. The ice was encountered on August 2nd at a latitude of 72 degrees 1 minute north. After failing to find navigable passages through the ice, they circumvented Alaska's northernmost tip, Point Barrow, and ventured into previously uncharted waters and ice floes. Although the Enterprise reached Point Barrow about 2 weeks after the investigator, thick ice prevented it from progressing, and it had to return, spending the winter in Hong Kong and losing an entire season. The ships remained out of contact for the rest of their voyages, with the Enterprise conducting separate Arctic explorations. McClure and his crew on the Investigator met with local Inuit on August 8th, who were not used to seeing such ships and had no information about Franklin's expedition. As the crew moved eastward along the coast from Point Barrow, they set up cairns to leave messages and occasionally exchanged goods with the Inuit. Yet no news was gathered about Franklin. When meeting with Inuit groups near Point Warren by the Mackenzie River, they heard of a European's death, which turned out to be from Richardson's overland expedition, not Franklin's. The northern ice remained impassable, but by September 3rd, the crew reached Franklin Bay amidst abundant wildlife and claimed sighted land as Bering Land. They conducted what was possibly the first exploration of this area and named a notable Cape Nelson Head on September 7th because of its perceived resemblance to Lord Nelson. They continued hugging the coast, hoping to find a way northward. Although progress varied, the Investigator managed to navigate through the ice, sometimes with the help of ice anchors and saws. As of September 16th, the temperatures dropped to around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 12 degrees Celsius, and the crew reached a high northern latitude, preparing for the winter as the rudder was removed in anticipation of ice pressure. By September 23rd, the pack ice's drift ceased. Throughout this time, the ship was battered by the shifting ice, but stabilized just south of Princess Royal Island by September 27th. The temperatures plunged below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 18 degrees Celsius, on the final day of September, prompting the crew to prepare for the winter by dismantling the top-gallant masts and taking note of departing birds. The violent shifts in ice were described by McClure as deafening and forceful, often shifting the ship and requiring the use of black powder to blast away threatening ice formations. From their trapped position, the crew conducted several expeditions across the ice, leading McClure to confirm the existence of a northwest passage. Turnon claimed Prince Albert's Land and nearby islands in mid-October. To adapt to their winter surroundings, the crew established a routine involving educational activities. Hunting was challenging, but they managed to supplement their limited food supplies with occasional muskoxen, some of which were lost to spoiling. On October 21st, 1850, Captain McClure began a journey with 6 others on a sled heading northeast to verify his prior sightings of a possible maritime route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. On his return on October 31st, McClure was able to validate his discovery, having observed a clear channel leading towards Melville Island from atop a hill on Banks Island, which stood around 180 meters high. The official log entry on his ship marked this significant finding, noting that on October 26th, it was confirmed that the body of water they were in was connected to the waters of Barrow Strait. The coordinates given for the northeastern boundary were 73 degrees, 31 minutes, north latitude, and 114 degrees, 39 minutes, west longitude. This effectively proved the existence of the Northwest Passage. The sun disappeared on November 11th, with the temperature on the surface averaging -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the inside of the vessel at a warmer 48 degrees Fahrenheit, with everyone on board remaining healthy. The air inside the ship stayed fresh thanks to improved ventilation and the regular refreshing of the living spaces. As the calendar turned to the new year, the crew kept their spirits up with various diversions, such as trapping foxes and observing seals. During the winter, the average temperature dropped to -37 degrees Fahrenheit, but on February 3rd, the sun rose again after an extended period of 83 days of darkness. To ensure safety, a stash of supplies and a whaleboat were set up on a nearby island. Excursions after the dark period resulted in sightings of regional wildlife including reindeer, Arctic foxes, hares, ravens, wolves, and a polar bear. With the onset of spring, they removed snow from the Investigator and began making repairs. The crew also embarked on additional excursions, but they did not aim to join other rescue efforts known to be in the vicinity, such as the crews of the Resolute, Assistance, Pioneer, Intrepid, and other farther vessels, including those led by Captains William Penny and Sir John Ross, as well as those part of the Grinnell and Ray Richardson expeditions. As the climate improved in mid-May, hunting and scouting teams were dispatched to look for more food, as their supplies ran low. Some teams encountered severe cold that resulted in frostbite, and one group encountered some Inuit seal hunters living remotely. One party circumnavigated Banks Island, establishing it as an island, while another coincided with John Ray's expedition passing nearby. However, no signs of Franklin were uncovered. Efforts were made to prepare for the ship's release from the ice's clutches. By the end of June, temperatures rose to 53 degrees Fahrenheit, but the ice persisted. The Investigator finally escaped the ice on July 4th, making its way through difficult icy conditions near the Princess Royal Islands. The ship made some progress northward, often becoming lodged in the ice again. In August, forward movement was challenging due to thickening ice. At their furthest north, on August 14th, they reached 73 degrees 14 minutes 19 seconds north latitude and 115 degrees 32 minutes 30 seconds west longitude in the Prince of Wales Strait. It was later thought that if they had a screw propeller, they might have continued the additional 45 miles to Melville Island to complete the Northwest Passage. Instead, they circumvented the south end of Bering Island, also known as Banks Island, and found more navigable waters. The crew continued navigating through loose ice until hazardous conditions led them to anchor the ship to an iceberg for protection. They explored the nearby coast, finding abandoned Inuit sites and an area of petrified wood indicating a former forest at 74 degrees 27 minutes north. As winter neared, the crew had some dangerous encounters with the shifting ice while anchored to the iceberg. Subsequent attempts to steer the ship further to the east saw limited success, although brief instances of navigable waters aided their journey toward Melville Island. McClure opted to take shelter in a bay rather than continue with the drifting ice. This decision, made on September 23rd, confined the ship for a second winter. Some crew members considered this a grave error. The ship's surgeon Armstrong notably criticized the move, suggesting it squandered the chance to be closer to Melville Island and possibly escape earlier when the ice broke in spring. Their location for the winter, known as Mercy Bay, was at a latitude of 74 degrees 6 minutes north and a longitude of 118 degrees 55 minutes west. As their supplies dwindled, and with insufficient provisions, after storing food at the Princess Royal Islands, the crew faced a harsh October. To conserve resources, heating was reduced until the colder phases of winter, causing temperatures below deck to drop near -10 degrees Fahrenheit, -23 degrees Celsius. Despite the availability of open water nearby, their hunting expeditions, while initially successful, often ended in the hunters needing rescue as they weakened. By November 10th, the ship was essentially sealed off for the winter. To cope with the monotony, the crew crafted necessary items and used gun wadding as makeshift currency. The boredom drove 2 crewmen to temporarily lose their sanity. December brought storms and even colder temperatures. The onset of the new year saw the crew sustaining their health mainly through reindeer meat, despite facing freezing temperatures that reached -51 degrees Fahrenheit, -46 degrees Celsius. The constant hunting of reindeer remained essential for survival, even though it took a toll on the hunters who sometimes needed saving. The crew's strength was fading, and among the ships that had searched for Franklin in the past year, now only the Enterprise and Investigator remained isolated in the Arctic. On April 11th, McClure and his men attempted a sled journey with a month's supplies to reach Melville Island and potentially make contact with other British teams. However, the mission was thwarted by poor weather and unfavorable snow conditions, and they did not achieve their goal. They did, however, find evidence of prior expeditions. By June, the rising temperatures bred optimism for liberation from Mercy Bay's ice, but the thaw was less promising than the year before, and scurvy cases increased. The crew's health benefited slightly from hunting and the collection of sorrel, a flowering plant. The ice outside the bay broke somewhat, but the bay itself remained frozen. By September, the prospect of freeing the ship had vanished, and McClure considered the prospect of abandoning the vessel come spring, a step he hoped to avoid unless absolutely necessary. On September 8th, McClure disclosed his strategy for a spring departure. He intended to send a group of 26 men to trek 550 miles to Cape Spencer, aiming for a stash and a boat left by Austin, and from there to seek help at Baffin Bay. Meanwhile, a smaller contingent of 8 would head back along Banksland's coast towards a supply spot and boat McClure had previously established in 1851, with the goal of reaching the Hudson's Bay Company outpost at the Mackenzie River. By stretching the supplies for those remaining on the Investigator, the crew's food provisions were immediately cut, making successful hunting, now including even mice, more crucial than ever. As October advanced, the crew's health sharply declined, with an expectation of experiencing the harshest winter yet. They prepared the Investigator for the harsh cold, which affected even the ship's interior. The onset of complete darkness on November 7th further diminished spirits and hunting activities. Despite intense cold that plummeted to -65 degrees Fahrenheit, -54 degrees Celsius, officers persisted in hunting, sometimes needing to be saved from the extreme conditions. The year ended with the crew in poorer health and more affliction than ever, though no lives had been lost. With 1853 came unprecedented cold, dipping to -67 degrees Fahrenheit, -55 degrees Celsius. The crew spent their days engaged in essential tasks and hunting when they could, a situation exacerbated by McClure's lack of provision for leisure activities. Food was in short supply, and the sick bay overflowed with ailing crew members, with even minor illnesses becoming debilitating. McClure continued to plan for the dispatch of his spring escape groups, intending to send weaker but capable men to bolster the survival odds of those who would stay behind. On March 3rd, selections for the crew were made, leaving those chosen to stay behind feeling disheartened. Those set to depart in mid-April had their full rations restored and saw a consequent improvement in health. Yet despite these plans, the crew suffered its first casualty due to sickness on April 5th when John Boyle died, casting a shadow on the already low morale and illustrating the grave reality of their predicament. Despite the slim likelihood of a successful escape, the crew of the escape parties continued to make arrangements. On April 6th, as some men were occupied with digging a grave for a comrade named Boyle, they noticed someone approaching from the direction of the sea. The man turned out to be Lieutenant Bedford Pym from Her Majesty's ship Resolute, which was under the command of Captain Henry Kellett and had been wintering off Melville Island. Her Majesty's ship Resolute, accompanied by Her Majesty's ship Intrepid, had been 28 days away by sled, setting up supply depots around Melville Island to aid in the search for both Franklin and now McClure, after previously discovering a message left by McClure in 1852. Lieutenant Pym described his encounter with McClure, stating that he was the last person McClure had bid farewell to at Bering Strait, which puzzled McClure upon their meeting at the scene. 2 days after this encounter, Pym made his way back to Her Majesty's ship Resolute, situated about 80 miles to the east, and shortly after, McClure, along with a group of 6 men, embarked on a 16-day trek to join Pym. Even with the hopeful sign of potential rescue, the situation on the Investigator remained dire. The crew suffered from scurvy due to decreased food portions, and on April 11th and 12th, they lost another crewman each day. Though the crew could exercise a bit and their breathing was aided by the use of contemporary Jeffries respirators. On April 15th, a group of 28 men, now focusing their efforts solely on Melville Island, set out with 3 sledges. McClure reached Her Majesty's ship Resolute and Her Majesty's ship Intrepid 4 days later, where he met with Captain Kellett and Commander McClintock. He returned on May 19th with Dr. W. T. Domville, the expedition surgeon from Her Majesty's ship Resolute. They assessed the Investigator to determine if it could be crewed safely, if it were to be freed from the ice. The conclusion was that the ship was utterly unfit to undergo the rigor of another winter in this climate, and so it was deemed necessary to abandon the Investigator by order of Captain Kellett. For the first time in 20 months, the crew resumed full rations. A supply depot was set up at the beach by the end of May, complete with a cairn and a monument honoring deceased crew members. Then on June 3rd, the crew raised their final flags on the Investigator before leaving it behind, setting off on sledges towards Her Majesty's ship Resolute, led by McClure on foot and carrying 18 days' worth of food. The journey across the melting ice was difficult, burdened by sledges each weighing between 1,200 and 1,400 pounds, 540 to 640 kilograms. The debilitated crew managed to arrive on Melville Island by June 12th, reaching the ships 5 days later. They had to supplement their food stores through hunting as they waited for the ice to release Her Majesty's ship Resolute and Her Majesty's ship Intrepid. The ice finally broke on August 18th, but by early November, both ships became trapped again in the ice at a location of 70 degrees 41 minutes north latitude and 101 degrees 22 minutes west longitude. Another crew member passed away on October 16th, while the crews braced themselves for yet another winter trapped in the ice, with no possibility for effective hunting, being so far out at sea. In October 1853, a group of ill crew members were evacuated from both Her Majesty's ship Resolute and North Star and taken back to England. Their arrival brought the first news of the Investigator's endeavors and the Northwest Passage to the public's attention. By 1854, the crew of the Investigator was beginning their 5th year stuck in the harsh Arctic conditions. In the spring of 1854, arrangements were made for the crew of the Investigator to switch to the North Star when they arrived at Beechy Island. Beginning their trek on April 10th to 12th, 3 groups traversed the harsh terrain, and despite improved health, they suffered from the cold, with socks freezing to their feet, necessitating cutting them off to prevent frostbite. Despite the tough conditions, the parties managed to reach the North Star between April 23rd and 27th. However, the harsh environment claimed another life at Beechey Island. The group kept busy by looking for further signs of Franklin's expedition around Beechey Island, where he had spent his first winter. Meanwhile, the crews of the Resolute and Intrepid abandoned their ships and joined the camp on Beechey Island on May 28th. Before this, an exploratory team from the Resolute had established contact with Captain Collinson of the Enterprise. Learning about his search route, they also gathered information about the condition of the Investigator, which had been deserted for a year by then. The Investigator was in a poor state, leaky, and trapped in the ice of Mercy Bay. By mid-August, the North Star finally escaped the ice's grip, while on August 25th, two nearby ships, the Assistance and her tender Pioneer, were abandoned. The North Star then sailed along the coast of Greenland, ultimately reaching the English port of Ramsgate on October 6, 1854. The journey had lasted nearly 5 years, and tragically 5 men were lost during the prolonged voyage. When McClure returned to England after his Arctic expedition, he was subject to a formal military trial, as was the norm when a ship was lost, but was promptly excused for the sinking of the Investigator. He was celebrated for his part in charting the Northwest Passage and received a knighthood, a decoration, and a share of a 10,000-pound reward, although he would never sail to the Arctic again. However, his journey was not without criticism. McClure's decision to part ways with the accompanying ship, the Enterprise, before they even reached the Arctic, was a contentious move. Some say this resulted from a mix-up in communication, while others accuse him of deliberate misleading. This choice to go it alone undoubtedly increased the danger to his crew by foregoing the advantages of traveling with a partnership. During September of 1851, McClure chose not to navigate towards paths of open water with enough determination, which resulted in little progress for the rest of the expedition. The ship's doctor, Armstrong, considered this lack of decisiveness to be a pivotal error that led to their later difficulties. Moreover, Armstrong took issue with McClure's decision to anchor in Mercy Bay. Armstrong believed they should have followed the coastal ice flows, which could have allowed for a continued push towards Melville Island through the pack ice. During April of the previous year, McClure also missed an opportunity to join forces with Captain Austin on Melville Island, which might have spared the crew some of their subsequent suffering. In the spring of 1853, McClure's proposal to have the crew split into 2 groups to escape the Arctic was seen by Armstrong as excessively perilous, given their poor condition and the ambitious distances that they would need to travel. Some even suggest that McClure's actual intent behind this escape plan was to get rid of the weaker portion of his crew to make the remaining supplies last longer for himself and those he opted to keep on the Harrowing Investigator. In the summer of 2010, a team of Parks Canada archaeologists quickly discovered the HMS Investigator wreck near Banks Island in Mercy Bay, within the Northwest Territories, using sonar technology. Shortly after their search began, within about 15 minutes, they located the sunken ship. The team decided against attempting to lift the wreck from its resting place. Instead, they focused on performing a detailed sonar survey and sending a remotely controlled vehicle to explore the site. The following year, starting on July 10, 2011, a diving mission was organized for a period of 15 days to take an extensive photographic record of the wreck. The group, led by Marc-André Bernier and comprising 6 divers, was the first to physically reach the Investigator. The wreck was found in a state of partial burial in sediment, merely 150 meters off the northern coast of Banks Island. Captain McClure is recognized for being the first to navigate the Northwest Passage, using both his ship and overland sledges. Although his actions were somewhat controversial, He received a portion of the £10,000 award for achieving this feat. The recovery of materials from his abandoned ship, the Investigator, marked a significant advancement in resource use by the local copper Inuit population. The strait through which McClure sailed bears his name as a testament to his accomplishment. In remembrance of the historical endeavors in polar exploration, a ceremony took place on October 29, 2009, at the Old Royal Naval College's chapel in Greenwich. This event was held to rededicate the monument to Sir John Franklin and to rebury the remains of Lieutenant Henry Thomas Dundas le Viscount, which had been returned to England and placed in the monument since 1873. Gathering a wide array of individuals tied to polar exploration, descendants of both Sir John, Franklin's crew, and those who searched for them, the event commemorated the United Kingdom's pivotal role in mapping Canada's north and the sacrifices made in the name of exploration. Notable attendees included polar specialists, writers, photographers, and direct relatives of polar explorers, with admirals, a bishop, and government representatives among them. Readings and speeches highlighted the historical significance of the event. Additionally, the Canadian High Commissioner and others spoke about ongoing explorations, including the attempt to locate the lost ships from Franklin's expedition. After the formal activities, a select audience enjoyed a reception, where discussions continued about polar research and exploration history. The next day saw polar writers gathering to honor Arctic explorers at London's Kensal Green Cemetery, where Captain McClure's gravestone was eventually found, sparking hopes for the preservation of his memorial.